for Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University. Hello, my name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University, and welcome to our Touchstone Beginnings episode, How to Manage a Co- or Associate Supervisor. And yes, let's all stand back. I'm not really sure how big this one's going to get, because we're going to talk about co-supervisors, associate supervisors, basically how to manage more than one person who is involved in supervising a higher degree student. So I'm going to specify the benefits and how to make it work. And I know this touchstone has a particularly odd beginning, because when I arrived at one of my former universities, I asked a colleague how many students he was supervising. And he replied, one principal supervision of a student, but he was paper supervisor for 5. So I just entered this new university and I asked this colleague, my apologies, but what is a paper supervisor? I haven't heard that term before. And he stated, oh, Tara, I'm only a supervisor on paper. I sign forms, but nothing else. I was somewhat stunned by this, so today, to stop a student's paper supervisor being a paper supervisor, let's think of some alternative models that are available. There are many international models for supervision or advising a PhD. There are also historic models. Most commonly through to the late 1980s, the more elite the university, the more likely a student was to be supervised by a sole or a single supervisor. And the statistics are clear. The highest success rate, the quickest completions come from sole supervisors. Other models involve a single advisor with a supportive panel. You tend to see that in the North American system. But the change to co- or associate supervisors as the norm emerged at the end of the 1980s and early 1990s in the United Kingdom, when polytechnics became new universities. They were called the post-1992 universities, post-92 universities. And the CNAA, the Council for the National Accreditation of Awards, was responsible for ensuring that the new universities maintained the standards of the old. The doctorate, the PhD, was where the rubber met the road, and the old and established universities wanted the new universities to work for it. So the PhD was the canary in the mine of the quality assurance within these new universities. This is still the case, by the way, in North America, where the new universities are seriously controlled by the capacity to not offer PhDs. The Australian higher education system, therefore, is pretty rare in that all the universities have the self-accrediting right to graduate PhD students. But anyway, as part of this control of the new universities by the old universities in the United Kingdom, co-supervision was required. So an experienced supervisor would train other supervisors on the job to create a pool of possible supervisors. Remember, little PD was available at the time, or even talked about, and very, very few academics had any teaching qualifications of any kind. So co-supervision was introduced for the new supervisors to gain training. It was not about the student at all, and it has now become embedded into policy and practice. And can I say, just as a reminder, I'm that old, by the way, that 19 of my first 20 PhD completions when I was a very young academic were me as a sole supervisor. 19 of the 20 of my first. No co-supervisors were involved. So from a student perspective, we can see once more that we are generalising what exists now to what exists in the past. And in the case of PhD supervision, that's simply not the case. For me, what I want to do now is think about some good reasons to have two supervisors. So for students, for supervisors themselves and also for institutions. So we need to think about why are we doing this? Is there any benefit here? But also then how to manage and organise co-supervisors for specific purposes. So let me give you some reasons why this is a good idea. 1. Supervisors leave their job, become sick, or die. As always, your old goth dean starts with the buoyant reason, considering the generational profile of our universities. Also considering the volatility of the higher education workforce right now, having a plan B is a pretty good idea. Co-supervision is a form of risk management, and we live in risky times. So that is a great reason to have a co-supervisor. It is really important that a student's co-supervisor is not a paper supervisor, that the person is involved because they may have to take over this supervision. And if they don't know the student, that creates an incredible danger point in the student's thesis, because they're going to have to take over that student's supervision, and at least one other person is going to have to be appointed to that team. It will slow a student's progress if they do not know what they're doing. So keep them informed about the student's progress. Keep the communication system moving between the supervisors. That may be through email, but make sure that a student does have the occasional meetings with the other supervisor. So yes, one-on-one's important, but try and meet as a group, even occasionally. 2. Inter-, trans and post-disciplinary theses. No single supervisor is going to be an expert in all the areas of interdisciplinary theses. The best way to receive the best advice in these cases is an interdisciplinary supervisory team. So this is a model of supervision that I often describe as portfolio supervision. So a student has a panel of experts amongst their supervisors, and a student, to use a metaphor, plugs in and plays particular disciplinary expertise at a particular time. So when a student needs a particular discipline, they plug in a particular supervisor at that moment of the thesis. And I'll give you an example where this model worked really well for me. When I supervised a thesis on Russian television. I'd done a little bit of Russian work, but I was a television specialist at the time, and I was the second supervisor and brought in for television studies to the supervisory team. The student finished in 3.5 years. 3. Specific expertise in one area of the thesis. This reason for co-supervision is distinct from the interdisciplinary commentary, but it does involve expertise, and in this case, it's frequently in methodology or in theory. The co-supervisor is an expert in a specific method or theoretical approach, and they swing in with intensity on these topics and at this time, but then are less involved in the overall shape of the thesis. So to give you an example, I was supervising a student in ophthalmology. Now, I am not an ophthalmologist, but this student was using social media as source material. So I had to work with the student to explore unobtrusive research methods with them, non-reactive methods, particularly with regard to digital materials. And then I would move away and bow to the principal supervisor's expertise in ophthalmology. But this situation works very well, and the co-supervisor has a period of intense engagement in the thesis, and then the role ebbs away and returns at the key stage. 4. Break up the boredom and freshen up the candidature. The last point also leads to the next one. The same person supervising in the same way over 3 years can be very boring. For example, I am a very boring and predictable supervisor, but the great gift of 2 supervisors is that 2 models of supervision are available. So the candidate can be freshened up, one supervisor can work with intensity on one chapter, and then the alternative model can be in place. And that's also, can I say, a very successful process. 5. Career development. The final reason to welcome co-supervisors is through career development for the student. Obvious reasons. Twice the networking potential, twice the publishing opportunities, and most importantly, they have 2 referees for the rest of their life. Referees, as we all know, I think, are worth their weight in gold, and we need to remind students of this. When a student is going to need a referee that student can trust, then having two supervisors will make an incredible difference. And in fact, I would argue their entire life and career becomes a lot easier. This opportunity must not be wasted or minimised. Right, so there, we have the reasons why a student can gain so much from two supervisors, but how does a student make supervisors play well together? And that is a challenge, and it's one I find particularly difficult. The most important strategy is to plan out the nature of the relationship from the start. Use our sheet that we introduce at the start of these sessions that outlines the discussion points for students and supervisors in meeting one, so that we're clear in that first conversation. What is the role of each supervisor? Are they present throughout? Are they working with students in different topics or intensities or ways? Be clear about expectations, and let's all be really clear and get those expectations met. So none of us should put up with a paper or administrative supervisor. This is a waste to a student, and it's a waste to supervisors. A student has the opportunity to work with the brightest people on the planet. Wow, it's an opportunity to make that work. And yes, I have profound problems with all of this, because I'm sure we've all seen it. All sorts of supervisors like to add their names to my students' teams because they know that I'm going to meet them weekly, I read drafts, and they have to do very little. I still have problems with these people, to be honest, and bad things happen. So this happens to me every day, so this is a challenge. And look, the best co-supervisor I ever had was Steve Redhead, the bloke I was married to, my late husband, so he died. But that was because, and the reason that actually worked was not only, or mostly I think, because we were married, but because both of us were hard workers. We both met with the student together weekly. We read the work, and we read the work in different ways and found different corrections and offered different types of advice. Kept it fresh, and it really was the perfect combination. And because neither of us really were too bothered about workload, and neither of us actually were paid for the supervision, we did it completely for the needs of the student. And we were an effective team. Now, I haven't really had that with anyone else, I think. I've been pretty underwhelmed by most of my co-supervisors, and the most common mode that I've experienced is the free rider, the person that we simply never see through the candidature. So we stop this happening by agreeing to the expectations at the start. Know that a student supervisor, all of them, have strengths and weaknesses, and we must not expect any individual supervisor to be a messiah, a mother, a father, a friend, or a social worker. But with two supervisors, we can work out clearly what each of them can do with the student and what each of them can't do with the student. And we can maintain expectation management with both. We know that a student may have independent relationships with each supervisor, and they may never meet as a team. That system can work too. But the dream, of course, is everyone having a weekly combined meeting. These days, though, there is very little chance of that. So have a student's core meeting with the student's core supervisor, but have a regular meeting with the student's other supervisor. Be clear about expectations, and please keep them involved. Remember that student supervisors, as we all know, may not get on. And that doesn't matter too much. The most important thing is that they get on with the student. And also the one big challenge we have to manage, and I find this very difficult, is beware the contradictory advice. One of the reasons I'm still not completely sold on the co-supervision model, even though it's been in existence for 50 years, is that supervisors can and do contradict each other, and the student is in the middle. How to handle this nightmare is as follows. To simply remember, it is the student's thesis. This entire process is about a student and a student's research. So a student will take and encourage them to take the advice that is meaningful to them, that is appropriate to them and discard the rest. Therefore, if supervisors get competitive, they get a bit weird, they get a bit aggressive, they get a bit nasty, that's not about the student. It's not the student's concern, and encourage them to take what is useful. Take the advice, ignore the stuff around it, and in that way, co-supervision can become a portfolio of advice that enables a student's progress. Thank you for listening to Touchstones, our professional development program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University.